Hello, welcome to Chapter 1, our Dymocks event series. I'm Kate Mayer, the fiction buyer from Dymocks, and I'm incredibly excited to be speaking to my guest this evening, Charlotte McConaghy, who's written one of my favourite novels of the last little while called The Last Migration. Charlotte, welcome to Dymocks Chapter 1.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
It's lovely to have you here. And I just wanted to chat a little bit about, I guess for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, here is its stunning package just here. I thought I'd just briefly mention kind of the general flow of what the book is about, at least from the beginning. We find our main protagonist, Franny, is up in Greenland, and she is trying to get herself on a fishing trawler or a boat. And this is in a near future where environmental degradation has happened at an alarming rate, and we've lost a lot of different species are becoming extinct and things like that. And our character's trying to get on this particular boat because she wants to track the last, what they believe to be the very last migration of these Arctic terns, and which is a type of bird, of course. But I'm really interested, Charlotte, about one, why you decided to kind of look to a near future for setting your novel, and why you chose that particular moment when a lot of the species had already become extinct. There's a few left. Can you tell us a bit about the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, sure. So it's not actually a setting that I had chosen or even considered when I first started the book. I never set out to write a climate change novel. I wanted to engage with my growing feelings about the climate emergency, but I had no idea how to do that. So I sort of put those feelings in a drawer. And I started with character. It's always character for me first, and that was the case with Franny and for this book. And but I was finding myself stuck there as well, and losing my inspiration. And I think the stakes felt really low for her and for the book in general. And I was also finding that the more I wanted to write about her connection to the natural world, the more I kept coming up against climate change. And I realized that in this day and age, if you want to write about nature, you can't do that without also writing about climate change. So instead of avoiding it, I sort of decided to lean into it. And I discovered that in the last 50 years alone, humans have killed over 60% of the world's wild animals. And that statistic really scared me to my core. And I was struck by the terrible tragedy of a world without animals, because I think that's where we're headed, clearly. And that was when I knew without any doubt that that's where I had to set the book, in that future. And not as a way to explore the dystopian kind of effects on humans, but as a way to try and look at the more existential crisis of losing the animals, and of how it would feel to be alone here. I wanted to sort of decentralize humans a bit, and say that we shouldn't just be looking at this loss in terms of how it will affect us, our food systems and our safety and that sort of thing, but as a tragedy in its own right. We're not the only living things that deserve a place on this planet, and we're not the only things that matter. So I sort of left it up in the air exactly how far ahead this future is, and left that kind of up to the imagination of the reader. I think it's for them to decide, but I did make sure that the world looked almost identical to our world, because I think that sort of reflects potentially how close this future may be.
Yeah, I found it really interesting you were saying about some of the alarming statistics that you hear around the climate change and the environment. But one of the things that I think is really powerful about your novel is, once as a reader you're put into that scenario and actually thinking about, what does this world feel like to be in when there are barely any fish left and barely any birds left and this kind of thing. And I think that's a very, very kind of powerful thing that is portrayed through fiction, which really surprised me when I was reading this novel, because you expect to be really impacted by these true facts, whereas I found that reading it through a fictional lens was really powerful, and reading it through the lens of Franny was. And I'm interested, can you tell a little bit about, I also am loving how people are telling us where they're from this evening. Please do that. Where are you Australian, from Melbourne and all kinds of places. But I'm really interested, can you tell us a little bit about Franny as a character, and where she's coming from and what her approach is to this terrifying environment that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, so Franny, I've spent so much time with her over the past few years that I feel like she's my best friend. I think she's kind of made up of so many things that I wish I could be more of. She's really wild at heart. She's deeply connected to nature and wild creatures. She's earthy and so brave. She's honest about what she wants, and she doesn't subscribe to a lot of the more normal societal values, like career ambition or the need for wealth. And I think these are qualities that make her creaturely. I love the idea that some people are more led through life by instinct than by anything else. But she's also a lost soul. She's been through a lot of pain in her life, and one of the major challenges in this book is how she's able to manage that trauma manifesting. She's a wanderer at heart. She's never able to stay in one place for long. And I definitely wouldn't say that I'm a wanderer, but my family did move around a lot as a kid. So by the time I was 21, I'd lived in 21 different houses. So I definitely know a little bit about what it feels like to be unsure where you belong, maybe, and where your home is. And this is certainly something that drives Franny through the story of this book. She's constantly searching for where she belongs, for family, home, but it's kind of her contradictory nature that doesn't allow her to have those things. She's instinctively always moving. I think she's a woman because she didn't grow up with a traditional family. She found one instead in the natural world, which makes her kind of keenly aware of its loss, and I think therefore kind of the perfect mouthpiece to explore this extinction crisis through.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned moving around a lot, and the novel is set, I guess, in a few different locations in Ireland. I mentioned Greenland and Australia as well. Did you, obviously pre-COVID, travel to any of these particular destinations? Because I definitely felt like Greenland especially was very vivid. I Googled the town that you were talking about, and I was like, yep, that's what it looked like.
Well, actually, that's the power of Google. I haven't been to Greenland. Oh, wow. I spent time in Ireland, which I absolutely love, and that's one of the places that Franny spends a lot of time. However, I did a few years ago, when the idea of this book was kind of first germinating, I went to Iceland with my grandma, and it was the very start of winter, and we'd been trapped in our little B&B because of a blizzard. And when we finally got free, we went for this really long drive over this kind of extraordinary landscape. It was this endless snow-covered stretch of undulating, glittering hills, and it led us to the base of this huge glacier that was slowly melting into this river that flowed into the ocean. And there were seals swimming through this beautiful blue water and huge icebergs floating by, and all of a sudden there was this kind of thunderous crack that exploded through the air. It was like nothing I'd ever heard, and it was the ice cracking. And I know, obviously, that Iceland is not Greenland or the Antarctic, but it definitely has that feel, I think, and I had that sound and those mental images so clearly in my mind when I was writing those scenes in the book. But yeah, it's also kind of a testament to the age of information that we live in. You know, you only have to have the desire to learn about something in order to kind of get a sense of it.
Definitely. And I mean, another part of that is that there's an essence of this novel that is an adventure novel. She is actually, traversing a large part of the ocean to try and track these particular birds. I've got a couple of questions of that, but actually, firstly, I want to ask you about why you chose the Arctic tern as the sort of animal that you were going to be exploring and really focusing on in this novel.
Yeah, so Again, initially I wasn't quite sure which bird that Franny would be following. I'd sort of figured out what she was going to be doing, but I had to do a lot of research. But as soon as I came across the Arctic tern, I just fell in love with it, and knew that it was the one. It flies from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back again every year. And because they live about 30 years long, over the course of their lifespans, they'll travel the equivalent distance of to the moon and back 3 times. And I couldn't believe that. I just thought it was so beautiful. And it also just seems so far for this little creature to travel. And so the bird kind of became a metaphor for courage for me, for the courage that Franny would need to make her journey. I think she really took heart from the distance that these birds fly, even in such harsh conditions. And they're getting harsher by the day due to human impact on their environment. But, they fly on just as all birds do. They're the ultimate survivors. And I think we can all kind of take heart from them.
When Franny kind of heads off to try and track these birds, she has to get onto a boat, and she gets onto, I think it's called the Sangui is the name of the boat that she's able to sort of convince, like, I guess, weasel her way onto in a way. Can you tell us a little bit about the people that she meets on the boat and that work on this boat, and sort of how she's in conflict with them and how she also sort of learns to get along with them?
Yeah, well, I had a lot of fun with the crew members. I wanted them to have a sense of play, so I sort of amused myself by making them as strange and quirky as I could. There's an old salty seaman who loves poetry and had a child in every port along the coast, and there's a highly superstitious and grumpy French mechanic, and an engineer who gets horribly seasick, a cook who only makes fancy fine dining micro-food that drives everyone crazy. There's several others who make up this kind of insane asylum, as they call it. But after I'd kind of sketched out these general ideas for the characters, I needed to sort of flesh them out by looking, I guess, not just at their backstories or their personality traits, but by looking at how they see the world. And that's a really good exercise for any character work, I think. What do they believe? And importantly, when you're doing an ensemble cast of characters, you need to kind of look at how their beliefs or opinions differ from the others and how that creates conflict. And I kind of needed them each to challenge Franny in some way. So they often had really counter perspectives and opinions to her.
I'm interested in you talking about sort of the characterization there. You couldn't really call The Last Migration your debut novel because you have written before, you've written some speculative fiction. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were writing before The Last Migration and what kind of made you turn your hand to adult fiction?
Yeah, sure. So I started writing books when I was 14. I was just a baby. And at that time I was very much wrong. I definitely still enjoy those from time to time. But yeah, so naturally that was kind of the genre that I wrote in. And I did that for about a decade or so. I had a high fantasy series for kids, a dystopian sci-fi series for teenagers, and another kind of romantic fantasy series for a YA crossover audience. And I think for me, I just try to write the book that I want to read, really. And so I guess as I grow and change and my reading habits shift a little, perhaps my interests shift, the things I want to write about shift too. And it's certainly not a matter of deciding which genre or age group to write for it. I think it's more about just letting the book inside me out. And it will be whatever it is, and probably the publishers will decide who to market that book to. And I really believe what Toni Morrison had to say, which was that if there's a book that you want to read but hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And that's definitely been the case for all my work, but honestly much more so for The Last Migration. It was definitely a book for me that needed to be written, and I had to really challenge myself to do it because it was tapping into something that felt very important to me, and in a way I think it's frightening to tackle something that's especially meaningful for you, but probably all the more worthwhile.
I love how Amy is saying here, a must read for every secondary school student as well, which I have to say I very much agree with. But one of the things that really struck me about your novel as well is how expertly plotted it is. And now it makes a little more sense when you talk about how much experience you actually have in a lot of writing from before. But, we learn a lot about Franny's backstory as the story kind of is still moving along this adventure. We sort of jump time periods and we hear more about her backstory, and it's so expertly plotted. Like, there were just so many things that happened throughout the book that I was like, wow, I did not see that coming. And so I'm interested in sort of how you approach plot, or did you learn things in the writing of this novel that helped you in that approach, or do you have any tips for writers?
So as you said, the book takes place in two timelines and they run alongside each other. One's Franny's present day journey, and the other is her backstory, and all the moments in her life that impact her and lead to her taking on this journey. And I did actually write the scenes of the book in the exact order that you read them, because that really just helps with the flow, I think. But I think for me, moving between timelines is quite a natural space to work in. I tend to jump when the rhythm feels right to me. You choose to focus on moments of change or learning in either timeline, and you kind of need a bit of an instinctive sense of pacing. I think I'm used to writing this way because all my early work, as I just mentioned, plays with nonlinear structure like this. So it was either using multiple points of view or multiple timelines. So I've sort of gotten used to moving around a bit. And I think I find the thought of writing something with one point of...
I think we've got a little pause again.
Looking to play around with the nonlinear structure, I think using multiple timelines can be helpful for a few reasons. It's a great way of creating tension for your main character. You can kind of clearly show who she is before and after certain mysterious events, and then build up to the reveals of information. And that can be really cathartic for readers. I also really like being able to go back and experience the big moments of Franny's life with her on an intimate level. And I think it allows for a deeper connection with her. I think the kind of main rule I would say for doing this is, when you jump timelines, always make sure that you're leaving at a point that makes the reader want more, or you want them to want to return to the timeline they're leaving, so that it's always a pleasure when they come back to it. And you do the same with both, so each have their own pleasures and intrigues. They both need to either be revealing character or moving the plot forward. And if the scenes aren't doing either, then they're kind of probably the ones you cut.
I'm interested as well I've written down here, you've got a master in screen arts and a graduate degree in screenwriting as well. So I'm really interested in how does sort of that background and I guess setting scenes and I guess the visual side of screenwriting and those kind of skills that you've picked up, how do you use them in your fiction?
Well, yeah, so I went and did those degrees when I kind of reached a point in my writing where I really wanted to learn some craft. I wanted to know some more story craft, and that screenwriting is amazing for story craft. It's really great at getting you to kind of nail down your structure. It helps massively with plotting because you get really good knowledge of where to put key things so that they'll have the most impact. It's great in terms of looking at character arcs and transformations, understanding genre tropes. There's a lot of really great things that I took out of those degrees. And in practice, particularly, I would say simplicity of writing, because screenwriting, you have to be really brief and simple and clear about things. And there's a lot of power in doing that. And also that visual sense. So yeah, you try and think about how few words you can use, but the ones you do use need to have a lot of impact.
And I guess in this novel it kind of plays out that there feels like there's a lot of mystery, and there feels like there's always more you need to know about these characters and the story. We'll be opening to some audience questions very soon, so please do start asking Charlotte some questions, because I'm sure you've got lots to ask her. We've got people tuning in from all kinds of places. We've got Potts Point, we had Darwin before, a bit of Melbourne. Thank you so much to everyone who has been tuning in this evening. My guest is Charlotte McConaghy, and we're talking about her beautiful novel, The Last Migration. I also wanted to ask, there's so many things I wanted to ask about this book. Did you, we were talking about experience before, and had you been to Greenland and things like that? Have you ever been on a boat? Because Franny kind of learning the way of, knotting and all those kind of things that people do on fishing trawlers.
I've definitely never worked on a fishing boat. It's actually surprisingly difficult to make your way onto them. They're really strict because it's so dangerous. You've got to be quite well trained. But, I tried to go on boats, and I spent a couple of nights on one. I get really seasick as well. So that's not very helpful. Yeah, a lot of my research was just, talking to people and reading heaps. I watched all those Mighty Ships shows. There's definitely there was a point where I felt like I just would never know enough to make it feel authentic. And I think there's also a point where you've got to stop researching and just start writing, because you can get really dwarfed by the idea of it. And that's where the tricks of kind of hiding what you don't know come into play.
Yeah. And I guess it was really fascinating to watch Franny interact with the different characters that you mentioned, and you did talk a bit about some of the characters that she met on the boat. But one of the things I found really interesting about that is Franny is a character who really is passionate about the environment, and she cares about the environment. And the people who are on a fishing boat at a point where, there's no fish almost, they're really looked down on in society, I guess. And even Franny sort of has to battle that with herself. These conflicting sort of views. I'm really interested in how you kind of created that friction, and I guess in a way that you were able to see a really compassionate view of these people. They had their own stories. They had their own reasons for doing this. Can you tell us a bit about those relationships and a bit of that tension?
Yeah, well, I mean, you purely from a craft principle, you always want to start from a place of conflict, and kind of allow the characters to learn from each other and teach each other. But it's definitely a state of affairs. I think we get so caught up in conflict and aggression purely because we're not communicating or understanding each other. There's real people on both sides of this, and people who are doing their best to kind of move through this world. Sometimes their livelihoods rely on the skills that have been passed down to them. Sadly, sometimes these skills might be in an industry that's doing harm to the planet, which we didn't know about until recently. So I think it's a matter of not blaming each other, but looking at how we can change the systems that are harmful or broken in ways that don't punish the individual, but that lift us all up and empower us to save the planet. I think for me it's simple. My dad's a beef and lamb farmer on the south coast of New South Wales, and I'm a vegetarian. And we could waste. Well, we could waste so much time fighting or judging each other, or we could just try to understand each other's decisions and perspectives. And that's kind of the main thing that I wanted to say with the book and with Franny's kind of gradual understanding of these people, and also of them understanding her, and coming to a mutual point.
I'm also interested as a writer, we'll probably open to some questions soon, but I'm interested in how it felt to have your debut novel praised by the likes of Emily St. John Mandel and my favourite authors. The Station 11 is an incredible book, and also Geraldine Brooks and authors like this. How did that help you in the early stages of, before the novel came out?
Oh, it's insane how much it helps. I'm honestly still pinching myself. It doesn't seem real at all. It's such an honor to have incredible talents be so generous with their time and their words. I don't think you really realize until you're in the industry how important it is to have well-established writers endorse a new writer's work. It can be really crucial in the early stages of publicity because nobody knows who you are. They don't know if they can trust you as a writer. And so, yeah, I'm just so grateful for that generosity, and I hope I can pay it forward one day.
I've got a great question here from Timothy, which he was saying, were there any non-fiction books you read to inform the extinction of species element of the book that you'd sort of recommend?
Yes, there were. They're actually behind me, and I just need to look to check the title.
A little study behind it there.
Yeah, I've got them all sitting. I've got a whole pile there. I read so many, to be honest. I'm not sure.
That's okay. We can always post
Yeah.
something.
I'll post some once I've got my list there. But yeah, it was really important to read as much as I could. And there were a few crucial kind of ones, and also articles. There've been some really fantastic articles about it all.
Great. And Sam here is asking, or Samantha, sorry, there are a lot of fictional extinction books out there, Ghost Species and Mammoth. Do you see this as something you want to read more of?
That's an interesting question. I'm actually currently reading Ghost Species. It's really great. It's a very thought-provoking read. And I think that is, yeah, it's a lot of people, there's a collective sense of concern, I think, that's happening now. It's something that actually really connects us, this sense of, well, I don't want to say doom, but
well, at the moment, it's not too far off,
yeah, I mean, look, it's an issue we're all becoming more and more finely tuned to, and I think that because of that, we want to read about it. We want to read about other people's perspectives on it and opinions on it, and I think there is a connecting feel to that, and a way that it actually helps us to feel less lonely.
I'm interested in, just before we started this chat, we were talking about how you've done a few events in America, because The Last Migration has also been published in the United States, but it's been published as Migrations. Is that correct?
Yeah,
can you tell me a little bit about the difference in experience from having a US audience, or how they have they reacted in general to the book differently?
No, everyone's been amazingly open to it. I've been getting lots of messages especially from, I think it's really resonating with people who live in quite wild places and have a lot of contact with nature and birds in particular. I've had a lot of emails from bird watchers who, I guess because that's their interest. Yeah, I know nothing really about birds. So that's been really lovely. The experience has been wonderful in both, and I guess also because of COVID, we've really been, it's all one world now more than it has ever been before. So a lot of these events feel the same as, I'm sitting in my study doing them from here, and all around the world, and yeah, I think in a lot of ways we're really connected by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also just interested, are there other ways that it's been different to publish a novel in a pandemic? I mean, you've published works before. What's that experience been like in general?
Yeah, you just have to get really used to being able to engage virtually, I guess. That's the kind of main difference. But there's also, I think there's a real sense of, in the same way, there is definitely a sense of people slowing down and wanting to kind of consider their lives and the impacts that we have on the planet. And so in a sense, I've actually had a lot of people say that this kind of book, which isn't specifically about a pandemic, but it is about the world and what's happening to it, has actually been kind of the perfect, I guess, balm, because that's the other thing. It is a really hopeful book. even though it explores a lot of kind of grim possibilities. The main messaging in the novel is one of hope and, of being energized to sort of, and galvanized to make change. So I hope that it's been, comforting a little bit in this sort of crazy time.
Yeah. I've got another question here from Belinda. Do you think fiction can sometimes be a more thought-provoking approach to climate change because it seems more personal than scientific? Great question.
Yeah, that is a great question, and I think the answer is definitely. It's. I think if you don't have a science background, it's really hard to engage in it all. It's very dry. It's hard to kind of understand what's going on, and it's really hard to conceptualize what it actually means and what the impact is. And I think because as humans, we're not that great at looking ahead. Certainly not looking ahead to negative things. So I think drawing a character who is like us and allowing readers to kind of experience the world through her eyes and her emotions allows us access to kind of engage with that fear in a more personal, intimate way.
Definitely. There's some great questions coming. Here we've got another one. Is there a message that you want readers to take from this book? Thank you, Sue.
Yes. Well, I kind of just mentioned it there, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. I think we kind of live in a world that's saturated by bad news. We hear about it every day. The next beautiful creature has become endangered or extinct because we've cut down too many forests, or because the sea levels are rising or temperatures are too high. It's a really grim time, and it's so easy to become overwhelmed, to despair, to become apathetic in the face of that. It becomes too big and we're too small, and how can we possibly stand up against it, especially when the people in charge of us don't seem to care. But what I really wanted to say with this book is that, yes, it depicts this bleak possible future, but we're not there yet. There's still time. This is a book about hope. Franny is a woman who's, I guess, symbolic of humans in general. At the start of the book, she's lost all hope. She's embraced self-destruction. She's kind of given up, really. But throughout the course of this journey, against impossible odds, she manages to reclaim her hope. She's able to see the beauty that still remains in the world, and she kind of can find that courage to fight for it. And so I hope that's what readers take from this book. Not necessarily that we're a destructive species. I think we're destructive when we lose hope, but that we have the power to be nurturing, to preserve, to grow, to protect. We see this every day in those little intimate moments, the kindness and generosity that lives in us. I think that's the real stuff. And it's our responsibility to fuel those things, to think about ways we can make our impact on this planet a positive one, to be brave enough to take up the fight we haven't lost yet. Let's make those small changes to our daily lives, because they all add up to big change. There's power in hope. It gives us energy. I think, that will be how we win this.
And you were also talking about sort of how Franny finds a lot of hope through the book, but I felt like as a reader, I felt a lot of hope during the book, and even just in the way that I was looking at the world differently while I was reading it, because, I'd walk down to Sydney Park and see the birds in the morning and just really appreciate the different species and how many were around and how beautiful they are, and how I need to be present to that. And I think that's really kind of, I don't feel that in many books. It doesn't take me out into my world and make me see it differently. So I think that was an amazing thing. And I've just totally missed the question that came up, because sorry, Adrian. Fast forward 20 years and a young inspiring writer asks for your input, taking lessons from advice given to you. What would you say? What would you finesse? And what would you definitely not say?
Ooh. I guess in terms of writing in general, the biggest thing for me is finding an idea, a story, a character that you truly love, because you're going to have to work on it for a long time. You have to sustain your interest and your passion for that project for potentially years. So you want to be really true to yourself. I know that's easy to say, but I think there's a lot of writers who get a bit caught up in worrying about what's right for the market and what will people like. The biggest piece of advice I can give is to write from your heart, and readers will know, they can feel that through the page. Absolutely. Write as frequently as you can, because practice is immensely important in building your skills. It's a skill set like anything else is. So do as much of it as you can. Don't expect it to be perfect the first time round. There's lots of revision in writing. Yeah, I think just be true to yourself, and don't get kind of bogged down in negative feedback and other people's opinions, I guess.
And also don't feel like you have to do such an amazing plot in order like Charlotte has done. The ability that I'm sure a lot of authors definitely could not attempt the first few times around. Maybe if you studied screenwriting or something. We have time for one last question, so we could probably just keep chatting all night. I'm just loving it. Our last question comes from Pen, who's asking, what, if you can tell us, are you working on next?
Yeah, sure. So my next book is a novel called Creatures All. I've spent the last kind of year and a half writing it and editing it, and it's about a wolf biologist who's charged with reintroducing wolves into a Scottish forest in order to rewild the landscape and the ecosystem. And she faces a lot of kind of pushback from the locals in that area. It's a love story, a mystery. It's a story about the healing power of nature, which is obviously a theme that I return to a lot. And that should be out. It'll be out this time next year, definitely in America, and hopefully here too.
Amazing. I need that book in my life. Krista, make sure that this is coming out from the house at the same time as it comes out in America. This evening has been Charlotte McConaghy, the author of the wonderful The Last Migration. I saw a lot of people commenting towards the beginning that they have just bought the novel or they're really looking forward to reading it. You will not find a better debut literary fiction this year. It's absolutely stunning novel, and it was so lovely to talk to you about it this evening, Charlotte McConaghy.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was the best.
And I hope everyone's enjoyed the chat this evening, and please make sure that you do tune in again. Our next chat is going to be with the amazing Tara June Winch, who of course is just won the Miles Franklin for Yield, and acclaimed author Tony Birch as well. The two of them are going to be talking about their novels on the 26th of August. Thank you for joining us on Dymocks Chapter 1. Thank you, Charlotte. Last Migration. See you guys.
Bye.